first of all, your name, like my name, uh,
Yes.
when is a queen and a diva ever going to be together?
That's actually such a good point. I actually love that. That's such a good point. I didn't even think about that.
Neither had I until I said your name. And I'm like, oh my goodness, diva and queen.
Yeah.
It just totally works, right?
Yeah, it really does.
I'm so incredibly excited to have you here because
I'm honored.
I love that we're talking about a subject that, it has become a little bit more mainstream, obviously, because of legalization here in Canada, and of course in other parts of the world. But it's still kind of taboo in other ways, right? People are
Yeah,
still
sure.
apprehensive and still unsure of, whether or not it's for them. But I can tell you from just our past history, and why I'm so glad to have you here is just what a difference uh, your education and what you have to offer has done for me and my life. So I'm excited to get this information out there for people and hopefully open up some doors to what's possible in any kind of healing situation for those looking for holistic or more holistic ways of, you know,
Medicating.
medication. Yeah,
Mhm.
medication. So I think the first question, you being a cannabis expert, the first question most people would have is, how does one become a cannabis expert? Because you quite literally are, and for those who had listened through the intro, certainly know all that you've done in this market. How do you embark on this cannabis journey and tell us your story of how you got to this point.
For sure. I think for me, like when you have something going on in your life, that becomes a big part of your life as well. So cannabis first came into my life as a medication, but to be quite honest with you, I was using it recreationally as a teenager in high school. Like every so often, I would partake in the ganja fest in high school on weekends. But little did I know is that it was doing so much work for my chronic pain, and I'm not sure I would have been able to get through high school without those experiences. Um, and I started really realizing that when I migrated from, a university level to going to Toronto. So I actually suffered for years after high school when I was only like just smoking on weekends. But I was at that time on like 15 different pharmaceuticals. So my body was getting pounded with chemicals and really just wasn't reacting very well. I was gaining a lot of weight. I was getting a little bit of that chin hair. I was exhausted. I had medication to help other medication. It was just a nonsense situation. And my liver wasn't working well. Things were just not ideal. And it landed me in and out of the hospital for I would say like nearly 2 years of my life. I spent in and out of doctors' offices, in and out of specialists, like having no answers really to what was going on or what was going to help my pain. Um, and I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia when I was 10 years old, so which is very young for anybody.
I
And
was just going to say that's rare, isn't it?
it's very rare, especially to be diagnosed in the 90s, right? Like
Well,
it
there's
would have
still
been.
people today who don't really fully understand fibromyalgia. Can you touch on that just a little bit of what that is? Because
Yeah.
I know, but I want our listeners to know, what does that mean? And at 10 years old, what does that
Yeah.
mean?
So fibromyalgia is an autoimmune disorder. It's finally been classified as one, which is an amazing step in that journey.
I didn't know
But it
that.
really is so complicated because it attacks not only your muscles and your joints, but your nervous system. A lot of people experience high levels of anxiety. I'm very blessed that that's not what I experienced, but my gut and my IBS is like, I should say, a real challenge for me. For anyone in school and anyone out there who's suffering, we know that when we're clogged in one situation and we don't know our exits, it can be really scary to be dealing with sickness.
Mm.
Um, and so for me, fibromyalgia just left me bedridden most of the time. doctors a lot of the times would say, oh, she's lazy. Oh, like she doesn't want to be active, blah, 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 blah. But really in hindsight, I was just so exhausted from my, my pain receptors working wildfire to try and heal my body, but I wasn't actually getting anywhere. So it really takes a toll on your sleep. It really takes a toll on your livelihood. And it just kind of leads you into depression for a lot of people suffering from fibro. I feel like that's what I hear from a lot of my support groups is that level of like no one listening and hearing you out when you know what exactly is happening in your body. And they're like, well, no. And you're like, well, hold on a minute. Like, this is my body and this is how I'm feeling. Why can't you just acknowledge that? So it it became such a complicated issue for me, and it just grew worse and worse and worse with the wrong pharmaceuticals. And eventually it led me to a point where I really thought I was going to have to write out my will. Like, I was like, there is no way I can live another 15 years like this. There's no way. And I was just getting worse and worse. I lost like 70 pounds in a month. I was so sick. So I started taking out all that medication. Um, and after several tests in, up, whichever way they could test me, they would test me, in the arm, through the mouth, the colonoscopy, like something, all these things that are so evasive to your body on top. Like, I don't even get a date out of it. They just like, feel like it's offensive. Like, you know what I mean? Like, where's the date, doc? So, finally
Doesn't this mean we're betrothed? And
yeah. Can I introduce you to my mom? She's just in the lobby waiting. Yeah, it was tough. It's tough to be a teenager and going through that too. Can't even imagine kids that are dealing with disorders at
well,
such
and I can't even imagine that because there's already growing pains, like quite literally for a lot of people at that age, right? Because you are growing. So when you figure your hormones are changing, your body's changing, and you're dealing with fibromyalgia at the same time, I can't even imagine.
and it was complicated for those who don't know. A huge part of my backstory is that I am adopted, so I have very little information. It's a private adoption, so it's not like they're working from like any family history either. There's just nothing to go off of, so it was just these constant tests that were always coming back. I was fine. um Eventually they told my mom that I should see a therapist because it's all in my head, and that's when I thought, like, had to just take a step back and think, like, is it? Like, you really begin to question yourself. Like, all these tests are coming back that I'm normal, but am I just making this up in my head? And eventually I got to the right gastro specialist. He changed my life because he really just, he was a young guy too. I think that helped. They don't have like the same point of views. And he sent me for the right test. And that test finally showed that I have gastroparesis. So I have a really slow digestive system. On average, a person might take a couple hours to digest an egg. It can take me up to a day. So it was learning that that was an issue happening in my body. And then on top of that, I got diagnosed with endometriosis. So they were
Oh,
like, this whole time we've been like pumping birth control into you. And really, we've been actually making you so much worse. So
oh no.
it was just like a series of wrong decisions made by doctors on behalf of my body,
Right.
which seemed crazy. And my mom was a nurse, so like I think it took her a while to realize, until they told me, here's a medication for her, but there's a 90% chance she's going to tick for the rest of her life. My mom was like, girl, we out of here. Like, that's not happening. And so it finally took that for her to like really kind of come on board with me wanting to use cannabis as a treatment, because I knew on weekends, for some reason, I felt better. And because on weekends I was like going behind and hanging with my friends and having a little joint, and I didn't correlate that that was necessarily the reason, because we weren't taught that it was supposed to help us. It was just going to make us druggies. Like that whole, like you said, propaganda, that stigma, that is so prevalent still, but was just so ridiculous for us when we were growing up. And
Wasn't that around the time oh, actually, I don't even know how old you are, so maybe I'm dating myself. Is when Nancy Reagan was the first lady, and that was her cause, right? The war on drugs, and so the concept of just say no, and cannabis was up there with every other kind of drug.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's where some of that, the hard-headedness, especially in the older generations, and I speak as a, from a point of view from my parents' perspective,
Yeah.
and it's because that's what was drilled into everybody back then.
And and you can't even blame people, right? Like, I can't blame you for that being what you learned. Unlearning is the hardest part about any of that.
Mm,
It's unlearning something and then relearning it completely new. So I don't blame people. I just ask
yeah,
people to keep an open mind to what I'm trying to teach them,
right.
right? And if you understand how it became illegal when it for so many years was not, that's like when my grandmother was growing up and a kid, it was on the shelves accessible in like the 30s. You could buy cannabis as a herbal medicine. And it was when people decided that, we're going to use cannabis as a way to take down the Latino and Black communities. That's when it became a substance of abuse. George Washington was growing hemp on his fields for years in the White House. But we don't talk about that, right? There's so
Mm,
many parts that we're leaving out. That's how the whole term marijuana came to be, was because it was a way to not decriminalize, to criminalize the Black and Latino communities, when really it was just a setup, as most are.
yeah.
So I think, that for me, that journey to cannabis was really tough too, because not only was I being raised by people who were Caucasian and evidently different, my mom was heightenedly aware that I'm more at risk as a young Black teen to be using cannabis. And it wasn't like you could get oils and edibles and all these supplies. It was like, here's your dried cannabis, there's 5 strains. Like it wasn't,
Yeah.
it was all this like exceptionally amazing opportunities to heal our bodies in different ways. But it took me, forever to find. I got rejected so many times for my medical card. No doctor would write me a script. They just looked at me and thought I wanted drugs, and I remember just like pleading with my doctor, being like, I'm in pain. And she's like, well, here's an antidepressant, and here's like your codeine, and here's your Lyrica, and here's your Wellbutrin. And like the list goes on for what doctors learn, right? They have to go through those 7 steps of all these different medications.
Mhm.
Have you tried an SSRI? Have you tried and like, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
So eventually, like, I was just using what I could get on the streets. And I have to be honest with people, and most people can relate to that story, right? Like,
Mhm.
you just had to do what you had to do. And then when I went to Toronto, I didn't have those connections. It was a whole new, brand new world for a Black girl that should know how to understand Toronto, but grew up in a very small community where things like that weren't touched on. So that transition was hard, because when I got to Randolph and started going to musical theater school, I was so sick my first 2 years, because I just didn't have access to my needs, or I didn't know where to go and I didn't know what to do. Should really say 1 year, because eventually I got connections. And eventually the dispensary started opening.
Right.
So, I mean, the dispensaries were a game changer for me, because I stepped into one and I knew what I needed. And they're like, hey, you should work here. And I thought, hey, I should work here. I should work here.
Before I work here, is there an employee discount?
Yeah. Is it free? And, like that was a game changer for me, is getting in the dispensary world. It was scary. You had to definitely risk a lot and know that you could potentially be arrested or reprimanded, right? With between the
Mhm.
raids happening. But for me, it didn't matter, because I was fighting for something I really believed in. And I
Mhm.
witnessed on occasion on how it could change people's lives.
Wow. Yeah, for sure.
So I feel like that, like, I feel like in a lot of ways, like people talk about God's gifts that he gives us, but I feel like eventually he was like, girl, I'm gonna just push your talents right into cannabis because I mean, the plant was given from the earth. I don't know why it's not a drug, it's a plant. um,
Well, and so many drugs come from or originate from plants. And if we think about in history, there was all kinds of drugs used very openly, buy it off the shelf, that are now considered the hardcore
mhm,
list of drugs, right? And so how did cannabis come to be lumped in with cocaine?
mhm. I think like I don't want to put the blame on anyone, but there was a huge market coming from another country into ours for years,
Mm,
creating the world of harder drugs like cocaine and heroin. And unfortunately, it was just easier to blame the person of color. And we see that from, unfortunately, one of the like women that got us our rights to vote as women in Canada was the one who wrote a book about Black men being evil. So it's
mm,
like, where do you sit on the fence as a female woman? She's like fought for our rights, but she wrote a book that changed the course of how we looked at cannabis and the colored communities.
wow.
And people really believed that because she was this woman of power that made a huge, massive difference.
Right.
Oh, so her word must be right. So I
Right.
think that, yeah, like that war on drugs has just been, whether or not people think it happens in Canada, it happens in Canada.
Right. Absolutely. So after working in the dispensary,
Hmm.
what got you to be the title, quite literally, of cannabis expert?
Yeah, I mean, after the dispensaries, things got really crazy during the Project Claudia raids. Like a shout out to all my people at Canna Clinics. Like we just worked so hard at trying to keep stores open, and it just didn't happen. And too many people were risking their lives and spending time in jail for the cause of cannabis. And it became like, where do your morals lie? So I just changed the way I wanted to get the message out there. When I was in the dispensaries and helping educate bud tenders, it was key for me to educate the community. We didn't just want to be open to sell cool weed. Like that's not what it was about. More like these people were coming in and not just like, I want the most fire strain. That's not what was happening. You had normal people coming in, like moms, firemen, someone who works for CBC, like normal people coming in and just looking for something that's going to help their stress, that's going to help their pain. That's so I saw that that market was there and it needed to be helped. So I worked really hard to try and navigate my way and use the power of my voice and my brain and my education that I had. So I ended up reaching out to a company and we created an off brand of their company, like a cannabis journalistic site. And so for like a year and a half, I ended up writing journalism. I was blessed to be able to spend my time so heavily within like the cannabis community at such a cool time and era of cannabis. Like
Mm-hmm.
that gray market area was really like really interesting and really fun. We saw like the normal Joe Blow being able to create his product and bring it out. There was opportunity for everyone in the gray market at that time. And since then things have changed, but um, you know, that kept growing. And then I kind of got headhunted, which is really awesome. Like my name was getting out there. I was evidently one of very few women of color in the industry. So it wasn't too hard to stand out. It wasn't like a Where's Waldo situation. You could always find Queen in a group. There she is. And like I'm a big personality too. So it's not like
No.
not
You.
gonna see me, you'll know I'm there. So I ended up just, finding out about Light Clinic, which I knew I needed access to a medical card again. I didn't want to be walking around with my cannabis on me, looking the way I do, unfortunately, and being stopped for something unnecessary. I'd already been through that and I just wanted to like avoid the law at all costs and any trouble. So it when I got connected with Light Clinic, where I'm a patient educator now, as you know,
Mhm.
the educator there, Martina, who is phenomenal, she was working with me specifically. And I was like, I don't need an education session. I can tell everyone they need an education session. There is nothing better than, first off, if you're a patient that doesn't know anything, great. This is perfect. If you're a patient who already knows something, let's shoot the shiz. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. Like, you can teach each other something, right? There's always a benefit. And like, I think understanding like the process of the clinic is really important too. So when I got into that conversation with her, I was like, look, there was a lot of stuff I just learned that I had no idea about. Because I worked heavily in the dispensaries, like we had all sorts of different product, but I really hadn't gotten down to like the nitty gritties of like trichomes and terpenes and all these different elements of the cannabis plant that can change the way it helps our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I said, like, how did you get your job? And how do I get it? And she's like, we're actually looking for another educator. And I'm sending over a resume. So I put together a cannabis resume. I had a heck of a lot of experience. Let me tell you, like, I also worked for Tilray for a while out of a sleep clinic, educating patients there to help the doctor who didn't have that set of skills, right? They can
Mm-hmm.
prescribe, but a lot of them aren't trained on the cannabinoid, endocannabinoid systems that we share together. So I had that history already and it worked really well. And now I've truly fallen in love with this clinic. I want to say family run. We're not all actually blood family, but we're just so close, and I think a lot of us suffer in different ways. So we can really relate to the patient.
Mm-hmm.
And then, that kind of landed me in an opportunity to apply for another job in the recreational world, which I work for a company called Allot, and that's a higher level of thought. And I am one of 8 that sits, well, I guess now 7 this year, but one of 8 that sat on a committee, the first ever cannabis curation committee. So we're the ones reviewing your strains before they go out on shelves. We're trying our best to give you the best strains, but last year we tested like over 70 strains. It was insane. So
Okay, so by that means you get to try them and review them. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, so my job,
Coolest job ever.
yeah, I
There's,
don't smoke
I
weed
can
for money.
hear, I can hear people groaning, going, "I want that job."
And you know what? There was over 32,000 applicants that applied. I'm still astonished to this day that I sit on this committee and that I'm a part of it. But I do have definitely a voice in advocacy for people of color. I work within the medical scope, and I've been through this journey from 15 years old, let's say even 10, right? Like
Yeah.
that journey to find cannabis, that journey finding cannabis, and now where I am now, which is really being able to help others, um, and support others' journey as well, which I think is really important. I mean, let's get real. If we had educators in the pharmaceutical field, things would be so much different with our drug problem. Like, so much different if we had educators with opioids. But,
Mm-hmm.
we're just not there yet. But it's yeah, I have one of the coolest jobs for sure in both. Yeah.
Yes, you do. So, you've got this job, you're sitting on this committee. How would you suggest, or what advice would you give to someone who may have never tried cannabis or CBD, and they've heard these words thrown around and they're looking for more information or help with depression or anxiety or pain? What advice would you give them as to the steps they need to take to find out more, to get what it is they need to, and then subsequently, and this is where you helped me immensely, is dosage and what to do, because you don't want to just jump in if you've never done it before and just you know go
Yeah.
willy-nilly, because, well, you also learn as you go, as I've discovered. But
Yeah.
what's your advice for somebody like that?
I think the first advice I'd ever give is low and slow wins the race. Like low and slow. I know people are like, but I want to heal. I want to heal. I want to heal. Like a lot of the time people are coming to cannabis at their worst possible state, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
at the worst stage of their cancer. They're at the worst stage of their seizures. They're at the worst state of their pharmaceuticals. They're on 10x amount of drugs, still in pain. Like it or they're brand spanking new and they're like 70 years old, but they heard about it, right? Like there's all these different stages. So I always tell people, no matter who you are, low and slow always wins. Um, and it saves you money on top of that, right? Take more than you need to if you, yeah. So, I mean, that's a really great starting point. I think for a lot of people, it's hard to just navigate the resources that are out there. Who's a trusted source, right? Like we have people like Royal Seed Queens who come up on right away on Google who are amazing, but they're not technically like a legal trusted source, where someone like Leafly is a little more on that edge. So that can be hard. What I always tell people is the great starting base is Facebook. Like Facebook has created such interesting way of sharing our social, but one really great element about Facebook is groups. And I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of opportunity to find a group specializing in something that you're dealing with and people who are already going through the experiences you are. Because a lot
Right.
of those times in those groups are a lot of great resources and starting out points.
Mhm.
Um, on the other hand, I would always go for looking for a cannabis clinic or licensed producer online before you do anything, because they'll navigate you to the right resource. Whether if the LP will say, hey, like we can sell you your products, but you need to go to this clinic or this clinic to get your, your medical documentation.
Mhm.
Or if we're the clinic and you've already found us and they're like, what do you do? We can connect you to the LP so that you can get your product.
Right.
So if you search like medical cannabis clinic, you're more likely to come upon something that's a little more of a reliable, trusted source. And they probably have resources on their websites too that are reliable.
Mhm.
And then I say, ask around. I know it's scary, but there's always going to be someone in a group, someone you probably had no idea was, taking CBD oil or using a strain that you had no idea, probably has a lot of great advice for you.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're welcome to reach out to any of my social media platforms and ask me questions, and I can always guide someone. But I'd say that I think we forget that asking for help is so okay.
Yeah.
And we need to acknowledge that in any circumstance of our lives, that asking for that help is okay, because we don't know everything. We just don't. Like you can't. There's you you're not superwoman. I mean, I like to think I am, and we all are in our own way, but we can all help each other out, right? Like I think it's my mom that always says, like, you don't need to own all the tools. You just need to have neighbors who also own some of those tools. Like, you just need someone to call. And
Yeah.
and I think that's the exact same thing for this. Like, reach out for that help, take that one big step, whether or not it's a clinic, whether or not it's a licensed producer because you feel a little more comfortable with someone who's already in the cannabis space, or whether
Mhm.
it's in a group. I think that's a really good starting point, period. If you're not with some people who can discuss the things that you're feeling and relate to you, that's a hard life. That's
Mhm.
hard.
Absolutely.
Definitely need that support team.
And it's been on every discussion board for the groups that I belong, people dealing with trauma or PTSD,
Mhm.
because inevitably somebody has a question about it, asking, and that is a safe place to ask because, you know, kind of we've all been through the ringer. So asking about cannabis or whatnot is
Not
a
so
pretty
big.
common, yeah, it's a common question. And there's a lot of people who are curious about it. So groups like you said on Facebook are a great place to go as a resource for information. And sometimes we just need to hear that somebody else has tried it, somebody else has done it, or that it's been successful
Mhm.
for somebody. And I never thought that I would ever be the person to say, hell yeah, like it has made a world of difference
Mhm.
in my life, and I'm still learning. It's still a
Mhm.
process for me, and of course I'm picturing all my former students going, what, Miss Neely, you? uh,
Mhm.
but it's been a game changer, one for dealing of course with chronic pain, but it has been amazing to help me sleep which I was an
Mhm.
insomniac for years. And so it has been huge in getting me back
Right.
some of that. And as you know, like lack of sleep just leads you down a path of other health issues and just exacerbate any kind of chronic pain. So it's made a world of difference for me. So I encourage people to talk about it. And I have thrown your name out to many different people who have asked me, just because, one, I know you know what you're talking about, and I know that the advice you give is sound, and you've done your homework. So I'm very quick to say you need to contact, you know, Kween at the Light Clinic, or ways to find you on Facebook, and we'll talk about that at the end of the podcast, because I want everybody to be able to reach out and
Yeah, for sure.
sorry, an old commercial just came out to my mind. Reach out and touch someone, but right now during COVID, can't do that.
Nope.
Um, but it's a conversation that needs to be had. And again, the whole point of my podcast is to sort of break through taboos, to talk openly about things that people aren't comfortable talking about.
Mhm.
And opening up that dialogue all of a sudden will make it easier to continue that discussion. And so, talking about this, and it just perhaps may plant a seed for somebody who is struggling, not knowing that this could potentially be an answer to something that they're struggling with. And for me, I would much rather deal with something that's plant based than, like you said, chemicals. When you said you were on 15 pharmaceuticals, no wonder you were having liver issues. Like, people
And
don't, you don't think about that,
like
right?
the repercussions, like what we see in studies is the complete opposite from things like CBD, right? We're seeing like people's livers are healing and people's kidneys are healing and people's blood pressures are going down. Now, we have a lot of studies to do to ever confirm that as real science for the majority in the masses, right? Like people want to see numbers. So we still have so much more to do in those, because people have to remember that a lot of these tests done anything previous to 2018 is all tests based on biased point of views, right? We were testing cannabis to prove that it was bad for you. That was the point of the testing, nothing else. Now that we have legalization, we can say, oh, hey, wait. Now we're testing to prove that it is good for you also. Sure, like cannabis isn't for everyone. I'll say that point
Mm-hmm.
blank. Like you might be a person listening to this and you're like, girl, I tried cannabis and it was not for me. Then it's not for you. No one's
Mm-hmm.
trying to pressure you. It's what works, right? Like carrots I'm allergic to, so I don't eat them. It's
Right. Yeah.
easy as that, right? Like
Yeah.
some people like bananas because they love the flavor. Some people like bananas because it gives them lots of potassium. That's recreational versus medical, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
where we find that scope of like what you need and why you use it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, if we take a step back and we say, hey, look, our bodies have a system that's called an endocannabinoid system. The plant has a system called the cannabinoid system that happens to produce the exact same thing. How is it possible? That's just not coincidence, you know?
Yeah.
Like things aren't made, this world, this planet, this mother earth who provides us and our ancestors provide us with so much beauty and so much education and knowledge that we can use from them in our past lives. We forget that mother nature is connected to every single thing that we do, especially as a female,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's this might open up an area that gets us to start testing on plants to see what else has the cannabinoid system. What maybe there's other plant-based things out there that also run from that. Maybe there's a whole other whack of terpenes or cannabinoids in something we really had no idea about because we've always been so close-minded because Mother Earth doesn't get us money because she provides for herself. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
difference. If we take away that greediness and that money, right? Cannabis would be different if there was a DIN number because doctors would have kickbacks, insurance companies would be making money. But we're not there yet. So it's not something people want to put forward because there's nothing valuable for them.
Mhm. Mhm.
Unless you're someone who runs off of empathy, in which case it's the right industry for you.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I I find it so fascinating that we live in a time where people are looking for more holistic ways of
Mhm.
survival, and if nothing else, this pandemic has shown us just what we can survive on, or what
Oh, for
little we
sure.
can survive on. We can't go to the grocery store every time we want to right now. And so you're making do with what you have. And so people are searching for ways to lessen their carbon footprint and to make a difference, and by eating things that are more organic. So that just seems like a natural path that we steer away from chemical medicinal, um,
Mhm.
what I'm now I can't think of the word, but
Yeah.
we want to step away from chemicals. We're taking them, we're like, we don't want to clean our house with chemicals anymore because of the effects that can cause. We're now more careful about what we wash our clothes in because of the chemical effects, so we're not putting dryer sheets in the dryer anymore. So
Mhm.
same, like, why wouldn't I want to see what options I have that can help me and benefit me, that don't involve putting chemicals or more chemicals in my body, and rather it's going to that more holistic approach, that it's actually all coming from a plant.
Mhm. And I think people would even beg to argue that point because they feel as though with the government control, there's still a lot of pesticides and chemicals that are going into these growing techniques. And what I tell people is grow it yourself. There's take back the responsibility that the government has been taking upon themselves and doing wrong, by the way, right? Like you can grow, if you're anyone in Ontario, you can grow 4 rack plants. You can always apply to get your license to grow through the government. And yes, they have like some sort of control, but at least you have a license. So that means if someone came and stole your weed from your backyard, you can call the cops and get that weed brought right back to you. you know, you that's a sight to see, is your weed being carried in the back of a cruiser back to your house. But it's how do we work through the framework of the government and change the narrative instead of
Mm,
just looking at things so negatively all the time, which I think humans are just so abrupt to do nowadays.
mhm,
Is let's change the narrative, change the way we talk about the plant, change the way we talk about most things
mm.
actually in life,
Yeah, I
and
agree with you.
find the positives in the situation. Let's If you have a problem with purchasing from an LP, grow your own. There's nothing wrong with getting deep and dirty with that soil and having then you know exactly what's going into it. Um, and that goes for anything. There's lots of people out there who garden every vegetable because they don't, whether or not it says organic, how do you know, right? You have to be putting your trust in, unfortunately, the powers that be, which tend to also unfortunately be quite manipulative.
Mhm.
So it's taking time to research yourself and ask the questions in open conversations. So that means when you're asking questions, whether or not you don't like the answer, you're still listening.
Right, right.
Or else we're not
Um,
going to get anywhere.
yeah, sorry, say that again.
Or else we're just not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, very true. Um, so can you share a little bit about some of the bonus things that you've seen in people that you've encountered, of how, CBD has changed their life, or cannabis has, done something miraculous? Because I know firsthand, not just with me, but I've started giving my pets CBD oil. And I thought, because I've got a dog who barks at anything and everything that goes past the window, and he high anxiety and stuff. He's a bit of a protector, and I thought maybe it would calm him down. And believe it or not, it has. Even though he still barks at everything. But I have a cat that was a rescue, and just was reclusive, didn't want anything to do with people. I was pretty sure, and anybody who saw him thought that, he was telling them to F off. And um, he had quite the attitude, but at any time you would go to pet him, he would flinch.
Mm.
So it made me think that maybe there was abuse in his past. And so I started giving all my pets some CBD with their food in the morning. And I can't tell you just how drastic the change is in that one cat, because he now comes out many times a day, sits on the table and meows at me to go and give him some love and
Mhm.
pet him, and he'll rub up against me and he's more confident. And i I had to videotape it and I sent it to a friend of mine who has known him since I got him, and she's like, he's a different cat. And that's my cat. Like, so I'm not talking about a person, but what it went total like 360 with him,
Mm.
from not wanting to have anything to do with anybody and, hiding out in the deepest, darkest corner wherever he could find it, to now coming out and demanding attention. That's huge. And I know of ways it has benefited other people too. And like I said, I've explained that it's helped my sleep. But share with us some of the research made, well, not scientific research, but I know it's made huge strides in people with epilepsy, and they're now looking at arthritis and Parkinson's, and how it can help people with that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the MS Society promotes the use of cannabis now. They work with a company and promote, unfortunately, it is a synthetic brand, but Sativex. So they do promote a spray for patients with MS. The reason they do use a synthetic brand is that means that the patients aren't paying out of pocket, because then it's considered a pharmaceutical. So it's not, I mean, even our patients who are using the real stuff really see these results, right? Um, I think, like, for anybody who's our anxiety patients or anyone in general, always ask the people around you love most, who know you most, if they see a change if you don't. Because
Mm.
I hear that a lot too. It's like, one guy, a patient I was speaking to, he was like, said, I'm not noticing any difference, but my wife says it's been a 360. So, when you're dealing with anxiety, sometimes you don't even notice the small things that you're changing. Um, I know, I had a patient, she was like, when I say home, I mean home. Like, for 15 years of her life, she did not step outside. Her husband would do everything. She had a very traumatic experience that left her so depressed. And I mean, as people know right now, as they can feel and probably relate to a lot of PTSD and anxiety ridden people, like, it, when you're home more and more and more, it builds a bigger burden. And it's
Hmm.
hard to break free of that burden no matter what. So she was just like, has not driven in 15 years, has not grocery shopped, has not, like, the only thing she goes to do is the doctors, or the things that, like, are literally essentials. And her husband still has to bring her, and he has to be with her the whole time. And, like, that's scary business. That's really
Yeah.
scary and very relatable for most people now, because we finally understand what that looks like. But I remember after 4 months of her CBD process, she called me. And at this time, we were using our personal phones, so you could reach us. They had our personal number, so it was what it was. And she called me. It was a random part of my day, and usually patients only call if it's an emergency. Otherwise, they do go by their booked appointments, right? So I called her right back. I wanted to make sure everything was okay. And she's like bawling on the phone. And I was like, oh my God, are you okay? Are you okay? She's like, I'm in a grocery store. And I was like, what? She's like, I got up, I drove myself, and I'm standing in a grocery store. She's like, I haven't done either of those things in 15 years. And I just went and did it. And then suddenly I realized that I was in a grocery store. And it's not that she, like, blacked out or anything.
Right.
It's, her life became much more of ease. And she just, she was doing more things around the house. So suddenly she just needed to go out. And it wasn't a thought, because her anxiety had decreased off of her. We see it in our seizure patients. If it wasn't for Charlotte Fiji, may she rest in peace, losing her was like traumatic for the cannabis community these last few weeks, because Charlotte Fiji changed the scope of how we looked at CBD as a cannabinoid outside the plant. So extracted from the THC, extracted from all the other cannabinoids was this cannabis oil that could like ease off seizures, and you can watch it happen. Like it, it's really quite incredible to see because that eh, I don't know, it just to me that's like whoever you believe in at work. Like
Right.
that's amazing. That plant, then that one piece of the plant just like took that seizure away. We see it in our children. So shout out to those canna mommies who still don't want to talk about it yet because they're nervous. But there is a lot of moms, and I don't think you realize how many of you are out there giving to your children to ease their anxiety. And we never prescribe THC for kids. Let's be super, super clear about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not what we're doing. But instead of putting your kid on XX and X pharmaceutical, we're using CBD as a role to decrease anxiety, to work on PTSD. We work heavily with veterans. We see a massive, massive result from our veterans community. In fact, Veterans Affairs will cover 3 grams um, per day of vets medication, which is a lot. That's quite a lot. So that's covered by our Veterans Affairs. So we're acknowledging the fact that the vets need help. And then in addition to that, we have a lot of our parolees who have access to cannabis now. So before, a lot of these people who came out of the jail system were coming out with a lot of PTSD, struggling to find an income, struggling to find a home, XXX. It's not easy for people who paid their dues. It's not easy for people who have gone in, spent a lot of years, and then told that they were actually innocent, right? There's a lot of different situations out there. We can't actually judge someone's story. But what we do see is that it's worse if you come out without the support than you need
Mm.
than being supported, right? Period, in any health situation. So we see that a lot in so many different groupings of people that these results are showing to be significant. Now, it doesn't work right away for everyone. It took me nearly like 2 to 3 months before I felt any difference from my CBD.
Mm-hmm.
But, I lived 20 years without it. How could I possibly expect it to work in one day, right?
Right.
The goal of your body with the cannabinoid system is to bring you back to homeostasis. So if you are just, let's say homeostasis is here and you're like, okay, well, now I've had Fibo for 10 years. Now I'm diagnosed with gastro. I have endometriosis. Oh, I'm dealing with a lot of stress. I'm not sleeping and I'm not healing. You're this far away from homeostasis. We expect in one day we're just going to like make that
Boom.
over.
Yeah.
That is just not going to happen. You have to give it time. And I know that patience is hard, so hard when you're suffering. But the outcome is going, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
it can be extremely significant. It might not take the pain away completely. It might not fix your sleep completely. Um, but it's definitely going to give you results and make you feel more, not only healthy again, but heard
Yes.
and empower again. Cannabis puts power back into your hands. You make the decision on how much oil you take. You make the decision on how much you're going to smoke that day. You make the decision on if you're going to take that capsule.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too, what's interesting is that the choice of how people take it varies too, right? Some people are like, no, 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 I don't want to smoke anything.
Mm.
Which, for me as a singer, that's always my concern.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, there's so many options. And of course, I'm talking to my stepfather about his pain relief and trying to get him to just open his mind to try CBD. And, his daughter has tried as well. And he's, to him it's a drug, and so we're working on him. But
Mm.
I said, you don't have to smoke anything. Like, you could actually put drops of oil in your coffee and drink your coffee. Like, there's so many options where it wouldn't even feel like you're
Mhm.
taking anything. And you look at the options with edibles now too, and how that is evolving. And I'm sure will change. Don't even know, has the law changed in Ontario yet about edibles? I
Oh,
know it was talked about.
yeah.
So that's a game changer too, when you get a little, what looks like a vitamin or a gummy or whatever, and
Yeah.
chew it and go on your way.
There's so many options. I think for a lot of people, there's that fear that smoking is going to harm their lungs and blank, blank, blank. So I stay away from cannabis. But really, like the majority of people that are using cannabis that like medically are probably using oils. A lot of people are using the sublingual oils because it's easy to take underneath the tongue. There's a lot of people using oral capsules. We now have oral strips. We now have vape pens, and those are very different from the pens that you're hearing with like the fear mongering in the States. Like we have very strict regulations in Canada and different with cannabis. Everything is very regulated with cannabis.
Right.
You have sprays. The sprays are very fast acting, very common for people with MS, very common for people with arthritis, so they don't have to worry about opening bottles. Um, and then you have all your edible products, right? Like we have companies like Canna Farms and Aurora that have like gummies and chocolates, but then you have people like, you know, the natural green organic Dutchman, Tea God. They just came out with THC infusers. So what it is, it's like packs of powder that you can pour into your drinks and create like your infused products. And they have teas coming out, and there's a company in Vancouver that's also partnering with, you know, a craft brewery, and they're working on, you know, a sparkling drink that doesn't contain alcohol. We don't want to mix alcohol and
Mm.
cannabis, but a sparkling beverage that has, you know, that cannabis CBD base or maybe a THC base. So we're seeing a lot of new products coming around as legalization 2.0 has kicked in.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these things are available in the black market that a lot of people have accessed. I prefer calling the legacy market, by the way. I think black market has just, it's so negative and like,
Yeah.
stop doing that to us. Stop. So
Yes.
it's called the legacy market. Um, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with shopping the legacy market per se. You definitely want to act the safest and get the best test results from people. That's your benefit of going to a licensed producer or going to at least a company you personally know, right? Like our Toronto people know tons of local edible makers. So,
Mm.
I mean, trusted sources is key, but there's so many different ways. I have one cancer patient who's only using gummies, like period. That's it. That's all. They don't want to touch, they don't want to try anything else because they tried a gummy once and that's what worked. Great. Great.
I say eat the gummy.
Eat the gummy. And you know, to all those people that are like, well, what if I'm keeping my like cannabis infused drink in the fridge and like my kids can access it? You put your beer in the fridge and your kids don't just pick up your beer and drink it. Not
Mm-hmm.
ever. Like, not ever.
Yeah.
So aware that those moments happen. I'm sure it's happened once or twice, but like when you tell a kid that that's like an adult thing or whatever it is, kids are smarter than I think most adults nowadays. You know what I mean? They pick up on things. They know, yes, no, don't do it, or put it away with a lock and key somewhere. Stick it in your room on a top shelf. They're a child. They're not a giant. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just modify. And I think a lot of people just need that hand holding answer. But you have
Right.
the answer to make your life easier.
Yeah. Well, because we shelter kids from other things. So how is that different?
Yeah.
Right. And so I think,
And talking and like to any of the parents who are listening, talking to your kid and being honest about your use
mm-hmm.
helps them. It, they know. They probably know. Or if you have a teenager, she probably knows. Like if you're doing it, she probably knows. Like don't disregard the fact that we've all been teenagers and we can figure stuff out,
Yeah.
or we know what party's going to be the coolest. Like educate your kids and talk to your teenagers and be open with them and have that conversation. And just like we would with alcohol use, and just like we would with sex, we have those conversations with our kids for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the exact same thing. That open dialogue creates so much space for like positive reinforcement in adult to adult conversations to adult to kids conversation. If we just educate.
Absolutely. And when we even just look at it from, if we compare alcohol with like adults using alcohol versus adults using cannabis, we would talk to the kids saying, well, the wine is for adults for dinner, not for kids. And we explain those things to kids. So why wouldn't we explain the cannabis? Because when we don't explain it is when they get curious.
Exactly it. Exactly.
Right.
And you might find your kids smoking weed because they have way more access than they ever did now. They really don't. They've actually made it harder for teens. Like, they've made it way harder now that legalization is around. We check everything. Nobody wants to be the person that's sold to a 15-year-old.
Right.
Now you can go to jail for that. Like, there's time spent for people. It's not just the people who are dealing on the streets. Like, this is serious. We're not handing out edibles at Halloween, ever. No one ever in their life has given away their weed for free. Also, like, just no, like, that's not happening. But having that conversation and I get it, like, I'm not a parent, so I can't have that relatable. I assume it's incredibly hard. I've been the teenager and I know how difficult I was. So I I almost wish we just had more educational tools and specific for kids
Yeah.
around any medication.
Yes.
That's and that, like, fear mongering isn't necessarily going to help everyone. It might scare the balls out of some people, but, like, on other people it might make them more curious. So again, that, like, re like finding a new way, an avenue to promote education too might help.
Yes.
And understanding that at the end of the day, if your kid takes a THC gummy, or your kid goes into your cabinet and takes 5 Advils, it's the Advil that's going to put them in the hospital.
Right.
It might make them feel awful for a while having some THC, and they might smoke a little bit and feel really awful. Give them some CBD, tell them to chew on some black pepper. They're going to be right back to normal. It's nothing that's going to, like, truly, I'm not endorsing it for kids unless you have a medical license and you need it. I'm not endorsing it, but I'm saying that at the end of the day, there's less harm that's going to happen from them popping that gummy than them even eating that, like, Dunkaroos and that crap at the grocery store.
Right. Right. Well, I've heard people throw around nobody's ever died of a cannabis overdose. Can you confirm that? Is that true? Can it happen?
I don't actually know, like, if there's, like, confirmation surrounding that. I know that the term green out is pretty common, and people have heard that, like, when you smoke too much or take too much THC, you green out. A lot of people almost turn, like, a greeny color, like, that, like, vomity color, like, they're about to be sick. And there's ways to reduce that. Again, that low and slow for any product is the best way to go, so avoid any side effects. Whether or not someone's actually overdosed on cannabis itself, I'm not sure of. And I'm sure there's probably some underlying issue to it. So whether or
Right.
not maybe they have an allergy to the cannabis, right? It's still a plant. Maybe that cannabis was purchased off the streets and came in contact with something else.
Mm.
And then there's also been some effects of cannabis and mold. So you definitely want to be careful at your sources and look at test results. The licensed producers will post lab results, or they'll email you lab results. So if that's something you want, ask for it. But the pesticides that they're using on the cannabis plants to maybe, keep it pest free, as we say, are less harmful than what the mold's going to do. Mold in your lungs is going to kill you way quicker than that pesticide would. So you definitely just want to be careful, because sometimes it could be related to something else. Like, a mold spore is going to kill you well long before the actual plant did, but it maybe came from the plant, right?
Right. Right. I
But
think the way I look at it is I just because very little affects me. So if I do smoke any to help me fall asleep at night, it's only, a couple puffs, and that's enough that's good for me. So I know that there's probably no possible way I could ever overdose if there was ever a chance of that, because I would pass out and fall asleep first.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and can you explain a little, because you said if let's say you said a child were to take that gummy with THC, give them some CBD to counteract. Can you explain, because the way you threw out the black pepper, my mind was blown when you first told me that. Can you explain what's CBD and THC, how they vary, and explain what you meant by giving somebody CBD to counteract the THC?
Um, First, I would say if you want more information, like Spectrum Therapeutics, which is like Canopy Growth and Tweed, they have some new resources that they've uploaded online with videos. So those are really helpful resources to go back to. But THC is basically your more impairing part of the plant. So that's what's going to get what people call high, or stoned, or stony baloney, whatever it is. So it's definitely something you want to use at nighttime. There are a lot of people that use it during the day, but we advise for nighttime use because for most people it is impairing. So you don't want to drive or go to work, but you might want to go to sleep, right? Or relax down for your evening, whatever that is. Whereas CBD is the non-impairing part of the plant. For years, we called it non-psychoactive, but that's just not true because we have endocannabinoid receptors in our brains, which means that our receptors are being changed. Therefore, they're impaired, therefore they are experiencing a type of psychosis, right? So we can't say that, but it's non-impairing. So you can still drive, you can still work, you can still go to school, you can still do your regular day-to-day activities, even by law. But CBD, while CBD and THC have a benefit of working together, oh, there's my kitty. She just opened my door. They have a benefit of working together called the entourage effect. Kind of like when you take, like a doctor tells you, hey, like you should take your calcium with orange juice. It helps with digesting, blah, 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 blah. Kind of the same thing. But on the other hand, CBD actually has the power to counteract the effects of THC and reduce some of those side effects that people are experiencing, whether or not that's paranoia, whether or not that's nausea, maybe dizziness, depends on what you're experiencing. But for most people, if you're feeling too stoned and you're like, I'm not feeling good, I have the spins, taking CBD oil will actually help to counteract that. If you don't have CBD oil at home, chewing on black peppercorn is a great way to reduce that back down. The terpene inside that black peppercorn actually counteracts the THC.
That blows
So
my
that
mind.
one's really easy because people have it handy usually around. Oh my God, this kitty, y'all, she does not play. Okay, go out. Okay, thanks for the visit. She needs CBD oil. Yeah, so I mean, it can be confusing trying to navigate through this cannabis sector. There's so much happening from growing to medical to recreational. I could talk for hours. We can get into phenotypes and genotypes, and people be like, well, what? Like, there's so much knowledge, but you don't have to know it all. What you need to know is trusted source, and then maybe get an educator, maybe go to a clinic, whether or not it's Light Clinic with myself and Martina and our company, or the company I work for, I should say. It's not my company, it's Rhea and Allie's company. Clinics are like around now. We're in a whole different framework, whole different environment of cannabis. We are still seeing a massive stigma. I know the colored community for sure feels that stigma heavily prevalent still. And I think a lot of people, even though there's legalization, it's still weird to walk outside with your joint. You don't know where you can legally smoke. You don't want to be charged for smoking in the wrong spot. So just staying educated, watching YouTube videos, following like really interesting people like Mara Gordon, following those doctors like, why is his name blanking on me? He worked with Charlotte Fiji. And he's on CBC all the time. Oh, I can't believe his name is blanking on me. But nevertheless, there are a lot of trusted like doctors out there who migrate to the cannabis space, and they have like the best responses and answers because they experience both, right? Not knocking pharmaceutical. There's a time and a place. Cannabis is not going to fix your thyroid.
Right.
So That might be medication you need. Um, but maybe there's a plant out there that might, if we start exploring those things a little bit more.
Well, and
Uh,
that's kind of like people exploring essential oils now,
for
right? That's
sure.
really big right now. Again, for that same holistic reason that if they can use an oil that may take away a migraine or at least help alleviate it, that's better than, taking some pretty serious painkillers. But I will say, on the topic of migraines, because I get chronic migraines, um, I take a THC CBD, like a
Oh,
one-on-one.
mhm.
So it works really well. I couldn't believe it the other day, and I can't believe I didn't think about it sooner than it was last week that I tried it, because it can be so debilitating. I can't even lift my head off the pillow. And I don't know what made me think of it, but I thought, oh, why don't I try? And what a difference it made for me,
Yeah.
right? All of a sudden, I could move without that feeling of like, bleh. Um, so, so many things that can help. And I'd much rather do that than, pop any kind of painkiller. And I mean, there's even studies that have shown some of the effects of just regular Tylenol, Advil, acetaminophen, and ibuprofen. I probably shouldn't use the names because there's so many things that have ibuprofen and acetaminophen in it that can have a huge effect on your liver.
Yep, for
I,
sure. And I just implore to people that at the end of the day, the government has finally re-legalized cannabis. And I would just take a minute to understand anything within the government framework and think about like how much they're really doing for you. I don't want to knock the government. They'll probably come knocking on my door. But the fact of the matter is, isn't always for the people. And cannabis was definitely something that is for the people. It's something that, the hemp plant and the cannabis plant can both be ungodly functional for many different things, from, you know, oils to creating cars to creating clothing to healing our bodies to just like overall health. That's a really scary place and position to be for a government that makes money off of all the opposite things, from plastic
right.
bottles to pharmaceuticals, right? That's all their money gone from one of the plants that exist on this planet. So I think just being aware that you actually have the decision to educate yourself in things, and you can decide. You have to make the decision based on a news article or your favorite anchor man. I would implore you to look at the other side on any situation, whether or not it's cannabis or not. Try to find both ends of that conversation and make a just opinion. If you're a woman, X amount of years ago, like not that long ago, realistically, you couldn't vote. For people of color, there is no way anyone of my who looks like me would be doing what I do in my life right now. Like 150 years ago, even 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We have come so far. There was a point where the LGBT community didn't even have a voice. There was a point where Native had no voice, and I feel like they still don't. There's so many things that we did wrong that we rewired and said, oh, oops, actually, we should change the law on this. Just remember that those things happen.
Right.
And, whatever law was made might not be right. Now we put people in prison for the things that they do to different communities of minorities, whether or not that be LGBT or whether that be a colored community, from Asian to brown to black to whatever. We The government just has never on accountability been right. If we look back in history, not once have they been right. We worked laws for the better because we're fighting for more opportunities for everyone. Doesn't matter what you look like. At the end of the day, if we peel down our skin and we peel back our voice, it's just skeleton and we all match.
Yes. And I think that's something that's really kind of opened that conversation with the coronavirus, because there's no prejudice with that virus,
Oh
right?
my
And
goodness.
that's what doctors have said all over the world. Like, this is affecting people of different age ranges, different backgrounds, like it doesn't care what the color of your skin is. It's it can get anyone. And so people are starting to recognize, oh, you know, there's hopefully, I'd like to think that for those maybe who were closed minded are starting to see, hmm, we are all people. We all are one, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what we look like on the outside,
Yeah.
right?
We all
Because,
succeed, we all suffer, we all have
yeah.
kids, we all have grandparents. We're just really not that different.
Yeah.
Um, and so, just taking a look at the world around you, and cannabis allows that experience to happen for a lot of people,
Hmm.
both recreationally and medically.
Hmm. Absolutely. So tell us, what does your future look like? What's happening for you in your future, and where can people find you online?
Definitely. So, I mean, for a lot of people, I'm hearing this like, I'm so bored in COVID. Y'all, you can message me personally. I will give you jobs to do because I definitely do not feel that way. I'm just really taking this opportunity to be working on myself and my goals that I've really always wanted to have get done. And now I kind of have I don't want to say free time, but now I have the time to make those things happen. So, I am working on launching my company called the Kween Company. I'm super excited. So
Love it.
just done phase one of the launch on our Instagram platform, working on the 12 days of quarantine giveaways. So 12 weeks. So each week there will be about 4 to 5 businesses giving away packages and gifts and all sorts of things to just help people out during this time, whether it's like a free virtual dance class or a free photo shoot for later, or a beautiful piece of silver sterling jewelry. There's all sorts of things being put out through this, and supporting the small businesses,
Oh,
uh,
amazing.
while also like cannabis is, I would say, a major part of my life, but another major part of my life is the dance and art scope. So
Which
I
is
went
how
in,
we met initially.
yeah, which is how we met. I went into school as a singer and never had dance, no acting experience, worked in, community musical theater, but it wasn't like professional training of any sort. And kind of came out of school. I graduated valedictorian and I came out of school for sure a dancer. And I've worked very hard in my industry, just trying to create opportunity for people for work, and then migrated to creating my own company. So for me, it's just like getting back to the studio will be nice again one day. But until then, I'm still working for Light Clinic as an educator. You can always find us on our website at lightclinic.com, or
And
on
that's
Facebook, or on Instagram. And that's if you're looking for a medical prescription or a grow license, and maybe you just need help with education.
and
Um,
that's light, LYTE,
why?
correct?
Yep. And then you can find my company on Instagram. You can find me under Kween K, so Kween Kay, or just Kween. I'm usually the only one on Facebook that comes up like first. I've like made a name for myself starting that. I was like the first one.
Of course you were, darling.
So that's basically how you can find me. I'm just trying to continue to push and create platforms for people. I've got a goal to have my book out by 2021, so I got to get that working, and then just creating an e-commerce site at which we can share Black communities and female women who are selling products. So there's a lot of things for me in the horizons. I'm trying to be a millionaire, you know
Darling, you're on your way. I can see it happening.
I'm trying to manifest that into my livelihood. It's not about the money, but just that mindset, really, if anything. So just changing and working on myself. I think if you're bored, pick up yoga. Definitely pick
Mhm.
up books. Now is the time to read and educate yourself. I just finished my first course and I got a certificate in a healing with the arts program. So I'm doing school right now on top of everything else. I'm still teaching dance also. So now is the time for people to there's so much free stuff. There's so
Yeah.
much free stuff. School is like free right now. Like Coursera is offering so many programs for people to get
Mhm.
certifications for free or courses for free. There's online dance classes. We're leading dance classes for free or pay what you can. Like there's no reason you should be bored.
Yeah, I offer free music lessons, like free music class
Yeah,
for kids. So we've got people from all over joining in, and we sing together and have fun for an hour on Tuesdays and Fridays
I
at
love
2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And yeah, everybody is wanting to serve, right? Because everybody understands we're all in the same, we're all in the same boat here. And so people are like, yeah, hey, you know what? I'm offering to help people out in this
yeah.
arena, and offering great stuff and worthy of taking that opportunity and running with it, right? Because who knows where it can take you. And when places like Coursera are offering courses, why not step out and do the one thing you've been saying, when I have time I'm going to, or I'd like to. Well, guess what, now's
Now
the
is
time.
the time to complete goals and dreams. There's no reason to there's no reason for any one of us to come out of this in a negative way. We can only come out stronger. And by that, I mean that we're understanding the importance of human connection. In addition, we're having the opportunities to work on ourselves and kind of reconnect with our self being and self worth that we've so badly needed for so long. Like,
Hmm.
just learning to be more humble, learning to be more caring. This, like, let's help serve each other. I hope that mindset continues.
I know, me
Start
too.
to get back to what normal life will look like, because, like you said, like that is like that's what we're here to do. Like God put us here to serve in
Yeah.
whatever gifts you were given. So if I get that lives are busy. If you have kids, you're driving here, there, up where, plus you're working maybe two jobs. But even if you take 1 hour out of your week set aside to look back on a journal you wrote during COVID, and start writing a journal during COVID and remembering those things that became grateful for you, those things that changed your day to day, take back, study some of that, because that's the important stuff,
Right.
that nitty gritty stuff that you might have not realized you were missing this whole time in your life.
Hmm. Well, now's a perfect opportunity to reprioritize what's important to you.
Yeah.
And that may look very different now to what it was before COVID,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And like you said, people are now realizing just how important human connection is,
Yeah.
because all of a sudden it's taken away from you and we don't know what to do.
Yeah. And I think
Right?
we've learned to stop, hating on the Joe Blow jobs and all the artists. Now we're the people who are essential workers and we're the ones running TikTok. So you better change your mindset, because now's the time. Come out stronger. I get it's not easy. Like, I definitely have low days. But what helps me get out of those low days is keeping busy and distracted from my own mind sometimes, and
Mhm.
also just like staying away from the media, less computer time, more books.
Yeah. I try to every day come from a place of gratitude. And
Yes.
so right now I'm like, when I have to go and pick up my essentials, I thank the cashier, and I thank them for being this an essential part of us getting through this.
Mhm.
Right. And would we have thought of that before, thanking the cashier at the grocery store?
Yeah.
No, no. But there are people who are putting themselves out there and putting themselves on the line for our wellness, essentially. And so we are starting to see things differently. So I try to come at everything from a place of gratitude. And it's like you said, it's hard right now, it's hard for everybody. But when you try and look for where there's abundance in your life,
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, like, everything looks different.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
it's definitely, people out there definitely might think it's silly, but your daily affirmations, prayer, meditation, like that stuff helps. And I was one of those people. I was like, nope, 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 no, no, I don't need that. I'm already right with my soul. I look back at myself pre-COVID and I'm like, she wasn't right with herself. She definitely let herself believe that.
Yeah.
But, sticking to your daily affirmations. I write in a grateful jar every morning. I write two things and I stick it, throw a post-it note in a grateful jar. And then I
Love
look at
it.
it at the end of my year and at the start of the new year, or maybe you do it on your birthday. But, these things are valuable. Don't start your day by looking at your phone and your tags. Start your day by a daily affirmation and like a 10-minute yoga
Yeah,
and a good
absolutely.
glass of water.
Absolutely. And of course, for me, it's adding a little bit of CBD into my
Yeah,
life.
and all the CBD you can get.
Yeah, exactly.
Pour it on my
Exactly.
body.
Well, and hey, you can buy stuff for that now too.
Yeah, any
CBD
topical.
infused.
Yeah, I use
Um,
CBD infused conditioner and shampoo. That's why my curls are so on fleek lately.
right? Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
I didn't even know that existed.
they're called Cane and Bliss. They're at Trade Secrets. Amazing.
I will have to look into that.
Yeah, great
Well,
product.
coming from a place of gratitude, I'm so grateful for you sharing all your wisdom, all your years of research and trial and error. And I think back to 10-year-old Kween, and would she ever have believed that she would be a cannabis expert, where the person giving out all this advice to so many people and helping so many people in this arena. Um, I think that's quite the journey that so few people can say they've ever had. And you are killing it, lady friend.
Oh, thanks, Ms. Diva. Yeah, I even think about myself at 15. Like, I feel like that was one of the worst and lowest points of my life. And I truly, truly thought I had my end coming for me. And now I'm running two businesses. And by the way, cannabis doesn't affect the way, like it's not going to stop your or hinder your life. I've definitely graduated valedictorian of my program. I've done two degrees and then some. And it's it's allowed me to do that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
And your creativity and people who've worked with you in the arts is just incredible as well. Like, you've got so many talents, my friend. This is just the beginning, and I'm so excited that you're venturing out and doing this business, well, another business, because since I've known you, there's been a few in and in between. You are a go-getter, right? And you just have all the love for everything and everyone, and it's such great energy to be a part of. And so I'm hoping everybody can feel that energy just in this episode and
yeah.
get that goodness, that queenie goodness. 'Cause-
Yes, get your royal goodness, girl. Get
yeah. Oh, I
it.
like that.
Ooh.
Royal goodness.
Yeah, yeah. And I thank you. Like, gratitude definitely to you and to everyone listening, because, it just takes that step. And I appreciate the opportunity to come on and speak and share some of my knowledge. And if you have knowledge and feedback for me, I'm always willing to take it. So people are welcome to reach out and connect or follow or whatever it is that, yeah, they need.
Yeah. It just takes the start in the conversation. And I hope that's what we've done here today, that at least allows people to open their mind and see what is out there to help them in their healing journey, which is what it's all about, right?
Yeah, definitely. So many blessings. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. Love you to death. Mwah, mwah.
Thank you so much.